Hello students. In the previous lecture, we discussed about the Eurocentric character and white man's burden nature of international relations. We also discussed four broad key areas where the impact of American and Western domination are clearly visible, out of which we discussed only the theoretical limitations. In this lecture, we will cover the remaining three key areas such as the conceptual problem, methodological Eurocentrism and policy concerns. We will end our discussion with some concluding remarks. So let us start with the conceptual problem first. Despite several systemic changes and the emergence of a new environment in international relations, the field is still heavily overloaded by the Eurocentric and discriminatory concepts, terminologies or narratives which lead our students to question its international character. So there are so many changes which we have already discussed, like the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, information technology revolution, the globalization process, but these are not reflected in the concepts we use in international relations or we research in international relations. So discourse on language in international relations is one of the machinations through which the Western powers advance their political and ideological dominance to ensure their survival. So not just the theory they are using to perpetuate their survival, to make themselves eminent in international politics, rather the concepts are also used equally to perpetuate their survival, to perpetuate their superiority. A typical case is the historical construction of non-Western states as the third world, developing world and the global north and south. Paradoxically, in the current international order, none of these concepts is appropriately applicable whether geographically, economically or politically. So if you just take the example of this, the whole debate on this third world, it was formulated in a period when there was the first world, there was the second world, and again it's a French historian and international relations scholar who popularized this concept of third world. But at present, there are so many changes in the global politics. So there is no second world. So how you use the concept of third world to describe the countries of the non-Western countries and describe their economy? So it's not applicable because of the drastic changes that have taken place in the last 20 or 25 years. Similarly, the long prevalent Asia Pacific construct was exclusionary in its definition of Asia in Western and Asian discourses, as it kept India out of the affairs of the region. So earlier, there was Asia Pacific construct, and this construct was basically formulated by the American, and when the Americans had good relationship with China, China was also a part of it, but India, that is the most, one of the most important countries of Asia, it was excluded from it. So that shows that there is a lot of politics in the formulation of a particular concept. Now let us think also about the Indo-Pacific idea that might seem to further employ to shift China from the center of things and downgrade its importance. So Chinese are saying the same, that if the Indo-Pacific concept is there, it's basically trying to counter China, trying to exclude China from the affairs of the region. So the same kind of politics is there, either from Indian perspectives or from Chinese perspective. It's also a reminder that the security of the South China Sea and other waters connecting the two oceans is everybody's business. So if you are having this new idea of Indo-Pacific, including the Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean as a single strategic entity, then definitely you are excluding China and you are trying to focus South China Sea and other waters connecting the two oceans as everybody's business. So you keep a scope for you to intervene in the South China Sea dispute or to counter China. So that may be a perception of the Chinese. Take another example, the concept of international society, which is sometimes interpreted as an international community, comprises only the Western countries and their allies. So the whole debate on this international society, it is again a concept popularized by the English school in international relations. Whom it represents, that again is a very serious question. It's definitely the Western countries and they are not talking of the other countries who are not part of Europe or their allies who may be from Asia, Africa or any other country, but basically the concept of international society is European in nature or Eurocentric in nature. Then there are many scholars who brand such narratives, terms and concepts as racist, ethnocentric, xenophobic and to some extent even Orientalist, as they diminish the internationality of the discipline. So once you use this kind of concept for others or for your own understanding, that is highly objectionable and it also serves your vested interest, and in the meantime it also affects the global character of the discipline or the international character of the discipline. Thus, higher scholars must concentrate on developing a universally acceptable discourse on language to address the conceptual problems in relations to language in the discipline. So, if we want to make IR a truly global discipline, we must work out on this concept, we must reformulate those concepts keeping in view of the interest of both the Western countries and non-Western countries, and keeping also in view of the major transformations, major changes that have taken place in the world in the last few decades. As Tickner and Weber argue, as a global discipline, international relations should be a complex whole whose theories, concepts and narratives should be inclusive rather than exclusive of non-Western discourses. So, if we want to make it as a truly global discipline, the non-West should be included in this discourse. The experiences, their cultures, their history, their day-to-day experiences, they should all be included in the international relations reformulation or while making it as a global discipline. Now, let us discuss about the methodological Eurocentrism. Now, the methodological Eurocentrism refers to the tendency that concepts and theories developed in Western historical settings and by Western academicians can be universally applicable to produce value-free knowledge. So, this is again a kind of hegemony, that when you try to impose your theories, when you try to impose your concepts to the non-Western world and giving an impression that these are all universally applicable, and you claim it as also a value-free knowledge, but it is actually not value-free. It is highly value-loaded and based on your perception, your history, your culture. Methodological Eurocentrism suppresses alternative modes of knowledge production, thereby universalizing itself. So, once you popularize your concepts, popularize your theory, once you dominate the other parts of the world through your perception of international relations, through your theory of international relations, in a way you are not allowing the local culture, local history, local literature to contribute in any way to the universalization of the discipline. So, you suppress others' knowledge because you want your version of knowledge, your version of truth, your version of international politics popular in different parts of the world. Non-Western scholars criticize the negative image of Africa in international relations and international law, which sometimes is contrasted with the civilized Europe. So, if you look at the historical writings by the American historians or the European historians, you will find how they have understood Africa, how they have not understood, they have in fact misunderstood Africa, and how Africa was considered as something, a dark continent. It is populated by the dark people, and it was considered something uncivilized, underdeveloped, barbarians kind of thinking, and how the Europe, it was a civilized kind of continent, and how it became the model for others to follow. John Hobson similarly questions not only the Eurocentric nature of international relations, but also its close relationship with racism. So, it was because of the involvement of international relations in racial questions, in color questions, many scholars like Hobson, they think that when we are talking of international relations theories or concepts, so we should also talk about this kind of perception, that how that actually legitimize the concept of race, the concept of racial discrimination, the kind of understanding about the other in international relations. At one end of the spectrum is the West, that is the identifiers of civilization, development, democracy, rule of law, and on the other side of the spectrum you have the rest with perennial uncivilization, developing authoritarian and lawlessness. So this kind of perception, that you are something like a contributor to the world, you are something the son of the solar system, or what is going on in Europe, what is happening in Europe, that is the best, or your political system is the best, your history is best, your culture is best, your painting is best. So that kind of perception, and others should follow you. So that kind of perception was considered highly objectionable and highly Eurocentric by the scholars of the non-Western countries. Understanding the concepts such as political development, political modernization inevitably invoke and engage the intellectual and theological traditions of Europe, while those beyond the West are often disregarded or treated only as underdeveloped or pre-modern. So if you remember what you study in comparative politics, political development, political modernization, these are all highly loaded concept used by the American or by the European scholars. They will describe you as traditional, your system as transitional, your system as modern when you conform to the European norms. So this kind of analysis, this kind of discussion, this kind of academic scholarship, they were highly objected and being challenged by the non-Western political scientists and international relations scholars. Thus, international relations continues to seek a parochially celebrate or defend and promote the West as a proactive subject of and as the highest or ideal normative referent in world politics. So through this kind of international relations, through this kind of research, through this kind of theories, through this kind of concept, you are trying to prove that Europe is the best, others should follow the Europe. So that is not acceptable by the scholars of the global south or the non-Western scholars of international relations. Now let us also continue our discussion about the same issue. Whereas Western scholars before orientalized the non-Western people, these subjects now orientalize themselves. So it's a very different kind of issue. So it's called more Catholic than the Pope. So before they orientalize the people of Africa, Asia or Latin America, so you, because of colonial education, because of colonial exposure, so you try to borrow them, you try to borrow their ideas, you follow them and you orientalize yourself. So before they do it, so you do it for themselves. So that is basically the point of discussion. The non-Western students at home and abroad study foundational texts from Plato to Max Weber without questioning their history, and in turn look at to their society through such ideas. So you don't study your political philosophies, your political philosopher, you start from the Western political thought, starting with Socrates or Plato and ending with Karl Marx or Max Weber. So in a way you are cut up from your own history, your culture, your philosophy, your experience, your civilization. So it's just like you are sitting on banks of river Ganga but talking about the Thames River. So that kind of perception is developing, that you are, because of this kind of Western centric international relations, you are cut off from your own culture, your own history. This Gramscian hegemony could result in certain self-fulfilling prophecies wherein Western perceptions and theories are internalized by those with power to shape non-Western societies, thus reinforcing their universal character. So the danger is that when your political leaders are in the West, when they are exposed to Western ideas and Western norms and civilizations, so when they are in power, they may try to borrow those ideas, they may copy those ideas and present it as something like universal principles. So that is the danger. The nationalistic reaffirmation of a Chinese identity as Confucian or Indian identity as Hindu, despite their initial European construction through the text of missionaries and ethnographers, is a good example. So Indian history is divided as the Hindu history of ancient period, the Muslim history of medieval period, the Christian history of colonial period. So this kind of categorization on the basis of religion, it's dangerous, and still we follow those type of categorization because we consider it as something very great, something universalized. So knowledge is a politicized concept and practice embedded in and serving the colonial masters by making the Orient inferior and justifying the civilizing mission of the colonial masters. So in that way, knowledge is perpetuating, this kind of biases, knowledge is, spreading this kind of biases, and it's serving the interest of the colonial masters indirectly. So that is the problem with methodological Eurocentrism. Let me now focus on the policy concerns. After the Second World War, the USA emerged as the superpower, replacing the European powers because they were all devastated in the Second World War. So it was particularly taken over by the Americans because UK was badly damaged, France, other countries like Italy, Germany, so they were not in a position to play any significant role in international politics, and that provided United States a kind of golden opportunity to lead the Western world and play an important role in international politics. It however continued the earlier policies of imperialism and domination that had been carried out by the imperial Europe. So whatever, you not only provided the leadership, you also carried forward their imperial policies, you also carried forward their legacies. Through the Bretton Woods economic system that established the financial institutions such as the World Bank, IMF, the USA dominated the world. You will be surprised to know that till today the West Bank president should be from the United States, and the managing director of the IMF should always be an European. And there is also differential voting rights for different countries. India's voting right is lesser than China, China's voting rights is lesser than America. So it's not based on sovereign equality, it is basically based on your contributions. So it is these policies that led to the formation of global north and global south. So if we are still using the concept like global north and global south, so these concepts have their origin from the Bretton Woods economic system. Clearly, trade, commerce, diplomatic activities as well as learning and knowledge production thrived in India before the coming of the Europeans. So it is not that Europe did great things on trade, commerce, everything. India was the largest economy of the world in terms of GDP, contributing almost 25% of world GDP in the ancient period. So it was also the second largest economy of the world during the medieval period, and we had Nalanda University, we had Taxila University, we had Pushpagiri University. Those were much superior than the present day Oxford or Cambridge. So it is not that we had nothing. The problem is when we were colonialized and got the kind of colonial education, then we started or we developed a kind of inferiority complex that we have nothing and they have everything. So that kind of inferiority complex is still there. So basically you will find that India is projected as something, it has nothing, the political system was backward, the country was backward, it's a third world country, it was a developing country, although these kind of perceptions are now changing because of the economic rise of India. Yet the narrative that start with colonialization in India are the only being independent and sovereign since decolonialization in the mid 20th century. So India was a civilization, India was a state, there were great achievements of India during the ancient period. In the medieval period, India contributed a lot to global science, mathematics, history, philosophy, everything. But still, because of the European history, because of the European perception, because of European understanding, because of European idea about the nation state, India is still considered as a country that got its independence in 47. So when we say this way, we rule out any good qualities of India, any good qualities of Indians, any good contribution of Indians to philosophy, to history, to science, everything. So basically, we look at India as a young country, as a country that got its independence only in 47, forgetting the civilizational contribution of India. So that is the problem with the Western oriented history and international relations. It is therefore seen as a new state which only very recently became a part of contemporary international system. So because you emerge as a nation state only after 1947, so you don't have any claim because you are young, you are new, and because your civilization, your history, we will not count that. We will only count when you got your independence. So that is the perception. This newness is used to defend international institutions that exclude India from power structures and decision making like the United Nations Security Council. So although India was a founding member of the United Nations in 1945 when it was established, so India was not made a permanent member. Rather, those countries, those who were victorious, like the present permanent members of the Security Council, so they were made as the permanent member. And still, although India is trying for the last more than 3 decades for the reform of the United Nations Security Council, but nothing concrete has happened till today. So that shows how your perception of India as a new country, as an independent country only after 1947, that perpetuates the kind of our hierarchy in international relations. The Eurocentric and Westphalian prism not only gives a skewed image of the current world order, but portrays the international world order as one that is based on sovereign equality of the states despite the prevailing influences and legacies of imperialism existing in the post-colonial states. So you project everything as something normal, something democratic, something liberal, everything is fine in the current world order, but that is not the case. When you talk about the liberal world order, it's not so liberal for non-Western countries like India, because we discussed about this United Nations Security Council, we discussed about the Bretton Woods system. They were projected as the devices or main instruments or main institutions that created the liberal international order, but this liberal international order is actually benefiting whom? It is the United States and its allies. So that kind of perception, basically excludes some countries like India, despite having civilizational history, good academic, contribution to different fields like science and technology, philosophy, mathematics. You are still underrepresented in any kind of arrangement that is made for global governance. So that is the problem with countries like India. So it is this biased chronicling of the historical narrative through which the international is given meaning and is understood. So when you say international and you think that it is an international discipline or a global discipline, so that is the problem, because if you look at those 4 issues which we have discussed, whether it is the theoretical problems, whether it is the methodological issues, whether it is the conceptual problem or it is the policy concerns, you will find that nothing is international in international relations. Rather, there is a strong need to make the discipline a global discipline, which we will cover in the second part of this lecture, particularly by focusing how this kind of Eurocentric version is impacting international relations, scholarship and research in the countries of global south or the non-Western countries, and what has been done so far to make international relations as a global discipline. Let us summarize what we discussed so far. We discussed that despite several systemic changes, the field is still heavily overloaded by Eurocentric and discriminatory concepts, terminologies and narratives, which is a major reason for the international relations scholars to question its global character. In the methodological Eurocentrism, we discussed how Western knowledge is understood as true, universal and objective, and non-Western ideas are dubbed as traditional, religious and even unscientific. When it comes to the policy arena, we have discussed how Eurocentric and Westphalian prism portrays international order as just and equal, but in reality, international institutions exclude the major post-colonial countries such as India from global governance structures and decision-making processes. We will continue our discussion on making international relations a global discipline in the next lecture also. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you once again.